experience. So let me just tell you before I begin, I cannot give you one definition of feminism and say this is feminism and this is not feminism. Primarily, our understanding and engagement with feminism differs according to our personal experiences, our locations, our beliefs, our choices. Depends on a lot of things, from where we are from, what we are doing in life, etc., etc. And locations also change. For instance, like you all talked about your personal experiences, how hard you struggled in studying, in reaching a particular place. For instance, like, if I get to tell my story, it will be entirely different from what you have told me. I come from a village in Kerala, a village in the sense, a village in the 80s. So when I went to study, like my school days would be like 3 kilometers walk in the morning, 3 kilometers walk in the evening to get into a bus, and then like another 1 hour travel in the bus to go to school, and then evening again 3 kilometers walking back, and when there is a flood in the river, I won't be able to go to school. So that's how I did my schooling. No, what I'm trying to say is we've started with talking about locations. So I I am a first generation scholar from my family. But the thing is, now when I narrate my experience or when I talk about my experience, I know I am in a very privileged kind of location. So I have moved on from that. So I cannot still claim certain kinds of experiences, for instance. A lot of things, many things you said I could also identify with. I also got married very young, may not be 18 but 23. By 25 I had 2 kids, and then like I went on to do my PhD. Lot of those struggles marked my life at that time. But now I teach in a central university. From there, like, I could get into the, luckily somehow, like, started working, then went to a central university, then got fellowships, went abroad, did like more studies there. All those things had happened. So now when I look back, I cannot say, see, I am a victim. In the sense, like, all these experiences make me, but I also very conscious of the privileges that I have in my life. So what I'm saying is locations also change. Our experience, for instance, what I thought of as feminist 10 years before or 15 years before might not be a feminist experience for me at this moment. You start driving at a particular moment in your life, you think it's a very important thing at that moment, but after 10 years it becomes part of your day-to-day kind of practice. So what I am saying is we move on, and as we move on, our perspective also change. And like, what we think of as important now also change. In the sense, family, job, children, all these, it keeps coming. But feminism, in some ways, like, is also to learning to cope with yourself according to those changed circumstances. Taking care of, for me, like there are lots of these books that mark what is feminism. Even today, for instance, Sarah Ahmed's work, a very recent narrative which says how to lead a feminist life. She tells us living a feminist life is the title of the book. So in some ways she's like narrating how to lead a feminist life, experiencing the feminist self. In different sections she discusses different kinds of histories, different kinds of different ways of living, that everyday experience of feminism, living a feminist life, Sarah Ahmed's word. So what I'm trying to say is, like, so every day we come across different kinds of feminist experiences. Feminism in that sense is also a very personal kind of experience for many of us. What I define as feminism might not be feminism for you, or something else marks your life. So what is it, like, is there an umbrella through which, like, we can say this is feminism, this brings us all together? And let us forget about the theories of sisterhood and all that, because in some ways recent developments in feminist theory also tell us that sisterhood in some ways carry a lot of other connotations. There is no large sisterhood. Our experiences are different, our locations are different. So what is it that makes us feminists? And like, is there a feminism where we can include men? Or is there a feminism where we can include intersections of experiences? Habib, I think, was talking about disability studies and how feminism can be incorporated or like can go hand in hand with this. And if you look at the field of queer studies, for instance, now that's the greatest tussle for feminism. One of the readings that I gave you in some ways is also talking about this friction between these two terrains, the entire queer experience. And earlier, like, it was treated as part of feminist experience. Now, like, how are we going to engage with questions related to queer identity within the fold of feminism? So what are the intersections that we can work with? So we will deal with all these in the next maybe 3 hours, 4 hours probably. Like, let us see how long we can. So let us start with this whole idea of experience or feminist experience. Basically, when we were all talking about experience, we all kind of interpreted it in a particular way. In the sense, like, one common factor that I could see in all these is about the question of emotions. One thing Bashir also pointed out, I think, he said, as a man, I cannot put in so much of emotional excess into what you are describing as your experience. So he is kind of skeptical about his subjectivity when he talked about feminism. Now, let us start from this whole question of emotions. So if I thought, like, I could see two kinds of, or like, two groups here, broadly, if I look at it. One is a section which is trying to think about feminism and try to understand feminism more, and to see this as a kind of way of life, etc. And there is also another group who I feel mostly the research scholars and all, who know what feminism means for them, and who is also trying to look at the nuances or the very subtle expressions or different forms of feminism and what is this. So let us quickly, I can begin with a kind of a history of feminist movement. I'm not going to give you like this happened at this particular year and all that, but a very brief kind of introduction to the feminist movement. I think somebody talked about Virginia Woolf and Room of One's Own and all that. If you look at feminist history, obviously feminism as a movement or feminism as a political thought began in 19th century or like late 18th century. Most of you must be familiar with Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication on Rights of Women, which was the first, which is treated as the first feminist treatise, where she talks about the experience of being a woman, and like she looks at this whole idea of feminism as an oppositional theory or an oppositional ideology or an oppositional way of life. So this is where we all have that notion that feminism opposes certain things. And what are these things that feminism opposes? One, androcentrism or patriarchy as such. So there is this thing, everyone who is a feminist, we all admit on the fact that the world is largely patriarchal, and to understand feminism, we need to have a different kind of perspective, which is different from patriarchal androcentric. And feminist research or feminist epistemology begins with from this particular point. Feminist practice in engaging with knowledge begins from this understanding that whatever is treated as knowledge, whatever is available, all the epistemologies so far, they are androcentric. So they are like what man thinks about women, what man thinks as women need. So somebody was saying that when they were talking about their experience, someone pointed out that, okay, women do this, can women say this, what did women of that time did. All these are like narrated by somebody else, someone else's perception of what women need, what women experience. So female experiences so far have been narrativized through the male perspective, and that is where this whole origin of feminist thinking comes up. So you can, so from that point, like feminist epistemology also developed and kind of bifurcated into many many kind of different platforms. We'll come to that. But yeah, so this particular moment of feminist thinking by Mary Wollstonecraft is also marked by the larger frame of enlightenment which happened in Europe at that time. This is also the time of European modernity. This is the time of enlightenment within quotes, because this is what is available to us as enlightenment. But now when we look back, we know this enlightenment is just one of its kind, and there were many other civilizations. For instance, if you look at Central Asia, 10th century, 11th century onwards, the entire frame of Islamic enlightenment is kind of deleted from history, which is not available to us. So European modernity and European enlightenment, or what we call as, or the Western philosophers call as enlightenment, this particular period of 17th century onwards, the moment of exploration, the moment of humanism. This humanist perception evolves at this point, placing man at the center of the world. And there exactly a woman is talking about the female experience or women's experience, and she says we need and moving on, following her chain, we also have a lot of others talking about questions related to women's experience, questions related to labor, questions related to domestic work. There is J.S. Mill and Harriet Mill talking about the whole idea of family as a place where women are getting exploited. All these things actually, the many of the things you narrated now in terms of domestic chores, how women end up doing most of the work at home. And that work, like, for instance, when you're asked this question, what is your mother doing? Often the answer is nothing, whereas like she is doing the 90% work to make your lives better. That those kind of things are never accounted for. So this whole concept of labor, this is not anything new. The sad part is this was discussed in the 17th century, 18th century, and even now we've been discussing it, and nothing much has changed in that front. So this whole idea of labor, and then like, of course, the Marxist thinkers in the next century, Lenin and no, not Lenin, Marx and Engels, them talking about family as a most exploitative kind of foundation of capitalism, where they say women's labor is exploited in the modern nuclear family. Women's labor is the foundation on which the nuclear family is built. So when you, for instance, these days when we have this whole question about modern capitalism and corporate jobs, and people keep thinking capitalism is breaking families, actually capitalism wants families. If you look at it from that sense, it exploits women's labor. If you look at all those big corporate advertisements that come up, it talks about family as the binding factor. You need family to sell your products. 1950s, post-World War, women of Europe and America, they were like promoted as this ideal women for families. Because men who were suffering in the war, now they come back, and for all the suffering, what they deserve is this good women who could bake, or Julia Child kind of women who would, like, the living room is filled with things like microwave oven and baking oven and all those equipments. Immediately 1950s onwards, the Western market is full of these things that would make women's chores, not job, chores easy at home. And primarily this is actually a moment of capitalist uprising. And also this is the reward for all those sufferings the Western men had in the war front for like 2-3 decades. They suffered, so come back and they enjoy all these pleasures at home with a beautiful wife and the beautiful kitchen and the dishes she cook. And so it's very modern, okay? So these things are not this way of patriarchy. This is modern patriarchy. This is capitalist patriarchy. What we are going through now. It doesn't have anything to do with ancient religious texts or those preachings. It's more modern in that sense. So we will come to this whole idea of modern versus religious, etc., things. So now, when I say this is modern, this kind of a patriarchy where you have a beautiful house and all those people and women working hard and women baking and all that, so like what is this? Feminism is modern. According to many of us, feminism is a modern philosophy. And how is this going hand in hand? So if you're modern, you have to be a feminist, you don't have to do all these. But being modern, instead of the old oven, I'm given a new oven and I'm asked to bake. I'm asked to, like I used to wash my clothes using my hand, now I have a washing machine, I have to do all that. So things won't change in many ways in that sense. Modernity, in one way or the other, it reasserts many of the old beliefs, old thinking, archaic kind of thought processes. It brings it in new forms and new kind of patriarchies emerge in the world. Yeah, so I was talking about Western Enlightenment. So if you look at this particular moment, what is at the center of Western Enlightenment? It's a humanist thinking or a humanist philosophy which tells us human beings are at the center of the world. And many of you are students of literature, you must be familiar with Tennyson and all those other writers and poets who would say, come I may, but go I must. Lotus Eaters or Ulysses, one of those poems by Tennyson. Ulysses, yeah, so I might not return, but I have to go. Exploration. That's the theme of enlightenment. In search of knowledge, in the pursuit of wisdom, in the pursuit of, worlds out there. And then what happens? So you go out, you are like searching for knowledge, you're searching for wisdom. But end of all that, where you end up is like, you are a human, you have this kind of urge to explore, but you also end up in a place where you end up as an exploiter of other cultures, other civilizations, other peoples. So vindication on the rights of women in many ways is trying to say that, okay, this is a humanist, this is the moment of humanism, this is the moment of enlightenment for men, but that doesn't include so many people. And of course, Wollstonecraft is trying to tell us it's not including women. And then many years later, the post-colonial or what you call as decolonization process now, they start saying, see, it doesn't include people in other colonies. People in colonies, it only includes the European Anglo-Saxon male. It doesn't include non-white people. So you talk about emancipation for everyone. You talk about knowledge, but you're not talking about knowledge for everyone. So along with enlightenment, a critique of enlightenment also comes up. Factors that oppose enlightenment comes up. And feminism is the foremost oppositional philosophy in that, which tries to say, okay, your humanist worldview doesn't include us, and we need to talk about equality and emancipation. And because you do not include us in your journey. And moving on, in the early 20th century, I'm talking about the history of Western feminism. In the early 20th century, there is this a phase where writers like Virginia Woolf and the second instance of first wave feminism, you can call this. This is not second wave feminism. This is again first wave feminism, where they started talking about women's rights. And what they talked about would be legal rights at this point. And Virginia Woolf says Shakespeare's sisters could not write because she didn't have a room of one's own. And so you need, somebody said, if you have 10 rupees, that's enough. Like, in the sense, it's not that that's enough, but that's important. So financial independence and a space to express your creativity is needed for women, or needed for feminism, a feminist expression. And this is the moment where they talked about right to vote, they talked about inheritance rights, they talked about right to have education. All these things come up at this particular point. And here, feminism becomes an engagement between the individual and the state. So you're fighting for your rights, your legal rights. And what is interesting here is 1920s, where this marked a very important moment for feminist expression in the West, because they never had property inheritance till then. If you look at other civilizations, for instance, Islam, right from the beginning, women had property rights, right? Women could inherit, and women could have their own, like, your father's property, you can. Sharia says 1/3 of your father's property is yours. So that kind of an inheritance, so that's why that's our problem again, to look at things only from the Western perspective. We only see those, that other things that the Western women had to fight for, a lot of these. Whereas it was already given in many other non-Western civilizations and cultures. Okay, so that's that particular moment for struggle for legal rights. And then if you look at Western society, then those were like the next few years would be the years of war. And then during war, for the first time in European history, women get some power at home, because men are not there. They have to take care of children, they have to work to feed kids, and many of those large homes became like those makeshift hospitals and accommodating places for war injuries and all that. So what happened during this phase, women started thinking about doing things outside household work, started managing finance, started managing the family, which was a moment of kind of emancipation for them. And post-war, again, men come back and they claim back all the jobs, and once again, it becomes a kind of disturbing situation at home. That is where, like, this entire Julia Child histories happen. People who watch movies at least would know Julia Child, the woman who cooks and bakes and who writes cookbook and all that. And then this entire obsession with modern gadgets at home. So women started getting thoroughly unhappy with the situation. And this is the moment of second wave feminism in the West. And they started rethinking about their lives, the purpose, and Betty Friedan's feminine mystic comes up, which says, like, there is nothing like the feminine you're not. And people started asking larger questions. Are you born a woman or are you made a woman? Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex comes in the 70s, where she says women are not born as women. The gender roles that are attributed to women that makes her a woman. And it goes on. So this is the moment of second wave feminism. Important works like Second Sex and Betty Friedan's Feminine Mistake and all that happens. And then in the next phase, by 90s, the entire questions related to identities come up, where people started decentralizing this whole concept of human, or this whole concept of sisterhood as such. So all of a sudden people started realizing that there is no one particular entity called women, and it is divided from within different women, different aspirations. Associating with this, you also have movements in language and representation, especially postmodernism and post-structuralism, which also brings in a kind of added dimension to feminist thinking, where you have writings from people like Spivak and Judith Butler and many others. Judith Butler, of course. Spivak is still Marxist and goes with the modernist phase. Whereas if you look at Judith Butler and people who started writing after that, a kind of postmodern experience of differences come up there. So this is a quick and a very, very, very brief kind of way of looking at the development in Western feminism. So now we try to put things into order and try to fit different things according to this framework available to us. But now, along with this, if we look at different kinds of modernities in different parts of the world, we have a totally different experience of feminism. For instance, if you look at what women of color were doing while this entire second wave was happening in the United States. By 70s, by 80s, a lot of black women came up and said, this is not our feminism. This is the feminism for white women. You are talking about experiences which are totally outside our idea of living, our idea of lifestyle. Bell Hooks, the feminist who passed away recently, Bell Hooks had this, there is this important work by Bell Hooks which is titled Feminism is for Everybody, Passionate Politics and Feminism. That's the title of the work. First part is Feminism for Everybody. So this work, in that she classifies feminism into two. One is revolutionary feminism and the other one is reformist feminism. So she says revolutionary feminism is really revolutionary. It would change people's lives. It would change societies. It would take into account all kinds of inequalities in the society and will address that. Whereas reformist feminism is like an adjustment feminism. Reformist feminism is an adjustment feminism. It will be it will make adjustments in lifestyle, in slight modifications. You get to wear what you want, and that is feminism. Or today you are covering your head, tomorrow you don't want to cover your head, so that makes you a feminist. Or you're eating chapati today, tomorrow you want to eat dosa, and then getting to eat dosa becomes feminist. So it's like mild adjustments. It's like very easy way of feminism, she says. And so she says most of these white women are reformist feminists. They don't want to make changes in life. And she gives this very important example. She says, see, white women now are accommodated in most of the offices. They get to work, may not earn as much as some white male, but she'll get a decent salary. And she's very happy with it. She becomes a good feminist. She prophesies feminism and she is a feminist. Then she says, look at their homes. What's happening? Are there men sitting at home and doing all the work? No. They pay black women to do the work. So, and most often these black women are underpaid. This is exactly reformist feminism. So you are thinking about your life, your feminism, and you can modify your life, and you can wear what you want to wear, you can go out whenever you want, but you pay a woman who's of a lower status to take care of all those duties that you were taking care earlier. And this is not bringing a change in the society. As such, women are ending up doing the same kind of things that you were doing earlier, but only that the woman who is lower in class and race, of course, here. So this is an exploitation. And she says that is why most of the black women are underpaid and exploited, and that feminism will not do any good for black women. And she urges black women to become revolutionary feminists. And she's asking white women to look back and see what they are doing. There is a poem by Jo Carrillo, a woman of color, Jo Carrillo. So the poem says, yeah, so I might not remember the exact lines, but the poem is addressing the white sisters. So when our white sisters see us, they want us to be pictures on their walls. And what kind of pictures? We should be like working in mines. We should be like holding children who are dirty. We are of like brown, yellow, black skins. So when our white sisters see us like that, they're very happy, tying our bandanas, working in the field, and they take our pictures, they frame it and keep it on their walls. But when they see us in our reality, they're so unhappy because we are not like those pictures in the wall. We are like different. Nobody who is working in the mine will be smiling. Like you will be struggling hard, you will be sweating. And we cannot be those pictures which are there. We cannot hold crying children and smile at the camera. So when they realize we are so unlike those pictures, they are not happy with us. So this is this whole story of sisterhood, or women working together. There is nothing like that. Women are so different, and this entire differences, like in terms of class, in terms of caste, in terms of religion, in terms of race, all these manifest. So therefore, by 1970s, this whole myth of women as one group, or this whole idea of women's personal experience, that is broken by the narratives of women of color. And there they started looking back at their own histories, and they felt feminist moments are plenty in their history. Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, there she says the woman who was sitting in the African tribal world, like knitting or making something, she was the first creative person that you can chase back in your, trace back in your history, in your lineage. It's not a woman in the 1920s fighting for your right to vote, because so many of these feminists started saying that our histories are much better when it comes to women's rights and women's role. And therefore it started giving feminism a kind of different outlook. And then there are a lot of women who also started talking about third world women's experience. You have people like Chandra Talpade Mohanty, who would say towards a politics of third world feminism, where she says this entire idea about feminism as it is spreading now, it is the white woman's perception of what is freedom, and this is not what is defining the third world women's experience. So different terrains, different territories, different kinds of identities, different experiences. So by the time we reach that postmodern moment of identities and questions, a totally different idea of feminism emerges. And what is confusing here is not just the idea of rights. Some women said the idea of rights are not going to inform our experience. or what I think of as rights is totally different. And that is where this particular idea of, like, I gave you three readings. I asked you to look into three texts. The first one, Problems of a Contemporary Theory of Gender, Susitaru and Tejasini Niranjana's work. So in that, what they try to say is, she points out a few moments in Indian history and try to see how women engage with these moments. And she says this is something that baffles feminists because, for instance, she talks about the Rashtra Sevika, the women who are participating in RSS. There's a large participation of women all on a sudden. For instance, in this whole dismantling of the whole destruction of Babri Masjid, a lot of women participated. How are you going to define this? How are you going to, is this a moment of feminism? Or now we read in 2002 Gujarat pogroms, a lot of women participated, aiding the abetting the crimes against Muslim women. And how would you define the agency of women in this moment? So these are like very complicated questions for a feminist. If we are only talking in terms of women being powerful, women having agency, women, like, so the Karsevikas are not, like, manipulated into, or they are not kind of nobody is hypnotizing them to do one thing or the other. There is women's agency. Or like if you look at 1980s and 1990s, those cassettes by people like Uma Bharti, I think, which were spreading so much of hatred. So how will you define agency in that kind of a situation? If we are only talking about empowerment and feminism, in such decisive positions, how are we going to define women's role? One thing we can say, like women who, the recent example, somebody was talking about Shabarimala. There was a group called Nama Japa women, right? Nama Japa Strigal, who came out and, like, was throwing stones at people who were visiting Shabarimala. So what is a feminist position in that, right? You look at those women, they are throwing stones at women who are going to Shabarimala. They are feminists, these are feminists. So between this, like, how will we kind of define women's role in this kind of a situation? So just being empowered, just being independent, just being agential. So feminism needs a lot more in terms of its definition, right? We need to understand the subtle nuances involved in this. So there are, like, I still remember when we started talking about feminism in the 80s in our, or 90s in my college days, the two oppositional ideologies in the Kerala context would be the Congress party and the CPM. And CPM would say, like, look at your women, you don't have enough women, etc., etc. And then Congress party would say, look at Indira Gandhi. She is, like, she was India's first president and prime minister, and our party gave kind of, like, supported somebody to come to power like that. So now here, like, so where is it women's empowerment, or is it like something else? So in many ways, empowerment, this whole question of equality and empowerment is very confusing. What is emancipation that we are looking at? Like, if you read Jan Scott again, like, she's talking about this whole idea of emancipation and equality. Oh, okay. So coming back to this context, which got a lot muddled in the postmodern moment, where identity became a point of contestation. People like bell hooks trying to say that what white women think of as freedom is not our freedom, and a lot got added on to it. in the post 9/11 world, it's not just the black women. You look at Muslim women, Laila Abulukat's work, Do Muslim Women Need Saving, that comes up, where it is mentioned like, what do you think of as freedom? Because her classic example, many of you sitting here would have read the essay, where or the book itself, Do Muslim Women Need Saving, where she tries to point out this genealogy of Save Afghan Women campaign. And she says Save Afghan Women campaign happens in the United States, led by Laura Bush, the leader of the First Lady of the United States. And she leads this campaign and brings in a lot of white women, and they're like, the picture of suffering Afghan woman is there running all over Europe, American media. And simultaneously, what is happening in Afghanistan? America is bombing Afghanistan. So on one side, you have the Muslim woman's picture giving this image of suffering Muslim women. So the widely circulated image would be the bombing is to help this woman, the woman who is suffering, and the woman who is oppressed by Taliban. Likewise, you would have seen what is happening during the Triple Talaq debate in India. Triple Talaq debate to support, we saw a lot of people crying for Muslim women, trying to support Muslim women, bring Muslim women out of this predicament of Triple Talaq on one side, but on the other end, we also saw that the very same people, what they did to Muslim women when they were ruling in states like Gujarat or even in Muzaffarnagar. So this won't go hand in hand. On one side there is a campaign for saving, and on the other end this whole saving campaign gets kind of diluted into certain kinds of hostile actions against Muslim men. So here, what is the role of the feminist in this kind of a position? What role would a feminist take? Should you say, okay, Triple Talaq is bad and Muslim women are victims of, there are many Muslim women who are victims of this. Or in the case of, as I said, the Nama Japa women, what role a feminist can take here? The people who are getting, they're throwing stone at feminists. They are also women, these are also women. So what is the ethical role a feminist can take in this? Where lies this whole question of feminism? What is feminism's role in this historical juncture? So these are some of the questions that I want you to think about, the very difficult predicament of us feminists in the contemporary society. I would like to look into one or two moments, like for instance, we talked about Save Afghan Women campaign. I was talking about the Triple Talaq instance. I I engaged with that moment quite a bit, and I was extensively writing and all that, partly because there were a lot of people who were calling themselves feminists and trying to help Muslim women in India by engaging with this whole controversy related to Triple Talaq. So one position I and a lot of feminists who were with me at that moment, they were taking was that, see, feminism cannot be, and this is one position that we again and again we are trying to engage with, you cannot separate feminism when especially when it is in relation to a community. You cannot just think about the women in that community. You should also think about how this is going to affect a lot of others. For instance, there is this work called Deepa Dhanraj is a very important documentary maker. you would have seen her work on Rohit Vemula. You would have also watched documentaries like Something Like a War, which I think is a very important treatise, Something Like a War, where she talks about how massive numbers of hysterectomies and vasectomies were done on Indian villagers without their consent or without giving enough attention to cleanliness, hygiene, and all that. And in many ways, this was like you might remember. You might not have been born at that stage, but this must be like in the 70s, 80s. Sanjay Gandhi assisted massive sterilization programs, but she's also trying to get deeper into it and to see like the racial and the religious and other kinds of prejudice, class prejudices that go behind this. So we definitely need to curtail the growth of population, but it shouldn't be against certain communities and certain class of people. It is not that the rich can have as many children as they want and the poor people should all get sterilized. So these, the subtle nuances behind. So as youngsters, we are all told about limiting number of children, population control, population increased number of population is bad for a country. But eventually, when it comes down to it, how it is conducted and who are the victims of this, that is one thing that we never think about. So, for instance, in this essay, Problems of a Contemporary Theory of Gender, they talk about these massive sterilization programs. Not just surgeries, but the hormone tablets that women had to take. Then especially women in the tribal areas, in the village setup where they are not much educated about it. Even something called tubectomy, all these surgeries, all these are kind of impositions on the women's body. And how this would affect, and these are all nation supported programs. These are not something that, these are campaigns. If you're familiar with this thing called Doordarshan, all these advertisements would be there in Doordarshan. The woman who's taking Maladi was one, one kind of tablet, and she would hold it in her hand and would smile at the TV. And we all think that okay, but nobody is talking about the hormonal imbalance this would cause on a woman's body. And so the entire risk of population, all those, in some ways it is dumbed down the female body, and it becomes a kind of state-sponsored atrocity against a woman. And who are the victims? Poor women, women of villages, tribal women, Dalit women, Muslim women, who are going through such financial kind of crisis in their lives, and this will make a woman moody, this would make a woman hefty, they'll gain excess weight, they'll kind of end up with, and after a particular period in their life, they'll have to suffer excessive bleeding. So all these things are done in the name of, in some ways, empowering women. So women can control reproduction now. So they have a say. But how can this be empowering? On one hand, they say, okay, now you control your sexuality, you control your body, you don't have to give birth as and when a man decides to have sexual intercourse with you. But at the same time, these are administered on women, or one way or the other, who had no control over their bodies. They have to take this tablet, added on to that, they have to give consent to sexual intercourse when and where the man would decide. And then added on to that this burden of an external object on their body, or tampering with hormones. So most often these kind of feminist campaigns sometimes, and later every time people talk about, I-pill was at some time projected as a great thing. every time, so you can have sex and you can get away with unwanted pregnancy using this. Okay, I can understand, like, it will help in terms of like in avoiding pregnancy and all. But in the sense, nobody is talking about the risk involved in it, the changes this would cause in a woman's body, the kind of hormonal imbalance. And as you grow older, especially like in your late 30s, 40s, the kind of hormonal troubles a woman would go through is kind of, you cannot even imagine, like, those kind of issues. And many times you might have wondered as you were growing up, why is your mother so irritated all the time? Like, she must have been in her late 30s, early 40s at that time when you were in your schools, in your teenage. And whatever you face, whatever you came across at that point would be some sort of expression of these kind of things. So now, what I'm trying to say is there is a kind of understanding of empowerment. You think that something is very empowering, but it is not. It has its own, like, you pay the price for your empowerment in that way. And it's always women who have to take the burden. It's not, nothing happens to men. And they would just, and why is it so? These are not, is it just because the female body is more complicated, or is it something more into it? So whenever we talk about, so instead of sitting and researching on female bodies so much, what can be administered to women to do this or to prevent pregnancy, why can't they kind of like, do so much more research on men? Because men are not willing to. And even now 80% of all these fields and industries and the powerful positions are still controlled by male oriented, male focused, androcentric thinking. And scientific research, when it comes to it, 60 to 70% of it is still controlled by androcentric philosophies, thinking, agencies, etc. Yeah, so what I'm trying to say is, like, these are instances that I pointed out to say that feminism is not empowerment in that broad sense. It is not. It's also about understanding the subtle nuances in terms of hierarchies. So, any of these, in any of these cases, like I was talking about this whole campaign on reproductive control, I was talking about Afghan women, Save Afghan Women campaign, I was talking about the Shabarimala issue, I was talking about the participation of women in destroying Babri Masjid, or participation of women in helping Muslim women to get attacked during the Gujarat pogrom period, that particular moment. So here, so women's agency, women's empowerment can be used in all these contexts. You can say, okay, women are doing all this, but can we? Are these, where is the ethics in all these? Like, to with whom should we stand in this kind of a situation? So every time, so in that sense, feminism has lost its charm as an oppositional philosophy anymore. Feminism is also a very powerful movement in these days. That is because, for instance, like you walk into a meeting. Every meeting organized by so-called progressive parties will have at least one female representative on stage, right? They have to. So CPM is struggling with that. Like, you have to make a woman sit in somewhere and say, like, she represents the Vanita Samvarana. That's very important. So why is it so? Why are people so insecure about not having a woman in the center? It's because, like, feminism is so powerful now. The first question would be, where is the woman? Like, somebody is speaking and immediately the question would be, you are talking about your experience, where is the female representation in it? So you need to have a woman representative in any of those meetings. What kind of a woman you choose, that's like, something else, but there will be a woman. And so feminism is not a feeble kind of ideology anymore. Feminism is a very powerful discourse. You can disrupt anything, any argument by bringing in the gender question, right? Somebody says something about something and immediately you raise the gender question. That person can be very anti-modern, anti-progressive if that person doesn't include the gender question in it. So feminism can disrupt, it has become so powerful that it can disrupt any discourse. It can ask questions, it can raise concerns about the methodology followed. For instance, okay, you have a survey. How many women have you consulted? Immediately the question would be that. So feminism is very powerful now. And it has become a very powerful ideology, a powerful discourse which can dismantle, which can disrupt, which can challenge any kind of so-called normal situations. But what is wrong then, if feminism is so powerful? What is wrong, I would say, is that our idea of feminism is still lying in the 1920s idea of feminism. We are not talking about representation. I've come to another question, which is kind of like, which could be a joke in this situation. But the thing is, feminism is not raising questions about inclusiveness. Feminism should, there is this work by Janet Haley, where she talks about feminism as a very powerful discourse, and she says it's high time how and why we should stop being feminist. How and why we should stop being feminists. Janet Haley is the author's name. I can give you the title. Actually, I'll be giving you a reading list after words, so you can look at, you'll get all these titles there. So she says this important thing. She says feminism has become so powerful that feminists should start thinking about their own power and start questioning themselves. I am saying this because for instance, this whole idea of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment on one side came up after a lot of hard work and struggle, many years of struggle. Sexual harassment became a kind of term in the legal, in the public kind of context. It is very important to think about sexual harassment in that sense because it's also a lot of hard work. So to talk about it, recently we came across a court order, and you can imagine, like, the kind of questions which are being raised. Now we have to tell them that you go and read all those legal developments that happen in the field. But the thing is, that's another thing, but the thing is, there is so much of feminist struggle. If you look at the Indian legal history in terms of feminist intervention, right from, like, this whole Bhavri Devi's case and the whole idea of rape and how this legal term emerged, and the way rape is defined, that has to be kind of repealed. And with Nirbhaya, we also got some sort of the whole Nirbhaya, after Nirbhaya case, the whole Verma Commission recommendations in some ways listened to a lot of appeals by feminists. But even then, like, there is so much of ignorance existing in the public. But what I'm saying is, there is a kind of historical journey that feminism has undertaken in India in terms of addressing questions related to rape, questions related to sexual harassment. You must also be familiar with Vaisaga versus state of Rajasthan, where, like, this whole idea of sexual harassment in workplace, that was dealt with, and later, after the guidelines in 2007, the law came into being, where a woman gets free hassle-free kind of environment in the workplace, and this whole extension of the workplace to even to the places where she travels. So most of the things, somebody pointed it out, the difficulty that one would encounter while traveling to work. Actually, it is included in sexual harassment at workplace. So if you're traveling by bus to come to a place to work, the sexual harassment you experience in the bus is also included in sexual harassment at workplace. You can go and file a complaint within the internal complaints committee, and it's their duty to address this particular aspect. Many of us do not know this. So what I'm saying is, this is a long journey, right? And in spite of all this, in spite of all these feminist interventions, now, like, we are also in a position where, like, we can bring in law in terms of we can ask questions about, for instance, like, nobody can, if somebody sits across me and stare at me while I'm working, I can file a complaint, etc., etc. All these things exist. But in spite of that, on the other side, there are also a whole lot of ignorance. There are people who would still ask stupid questions. There are still people who would ask, why did you took so long to report the rape? Why did you not do this? You could have told the immediate, why didn't you cry? Why didn't you do this? Well, all these nonsense also exists on the other end. But what I'm trying to say is, there is a gradual progress that towards reaching this particular. So nobody is kind of like, you cannot discard the efforts taken by feminists. But in spite of all these, there are moments when certain categories of women feel there is still unevenness in this journey. Like the Nirbhaya case and with the UP sisters, those two Dalit sisters who got raped. And Arundhati Roy had to say this. She said there is so much of response to Nirbhaya because it also fits into our idea of the criminal poor. Because the bus cleaner, the rickshaw puller, those are like, very easily identifiable as the targets. And we could all come out and have so many candlelight marches. Whereas when it happened to the Dalit sisters in UP, what was the result? They were in so many, there is, I think Kalpana Kanaviran has an article on this where she talks about the unevenness in our responses to crime against women. So some crimes are like, crimes against women, whereas some crimes are like, sidelined, kept aside, treated. And the most of the times, like, most times when we think about sexual harassment, I also feel this unevenness work. If the assaulter is somebody who belongs to certain communities, certain castes, there is so much of public angst against it. It's like even now it's said about United States that a majority of people sentenced to death in the United States are black men. And in India, it is Dalits and Muslims. So if you look at this this numerical evidence before us, it's not surprising that we are so happy to, in some ways, like as a society, we move towards calling some people criminals and some people as like, gentleman. It was just a mistake on his part. He wouldn't have done it in any other situation. We don't know why he did that. I have heard this many times in sexual assault cases, especially within institutions. Even in very emancipated, progressive academic institutions, this happen. Against a Dalit male, against a Muslim male, it's very easy. Okay, we know he's like that. Whereas when it comes to upcaste Hindu men, I don't know what happened. he's like, usually he's such a, then there will be 10 women who have come out and say, like, he walked with me all the way from Europe to America at night, and then, like, he didn't even raise a finger. I don't know what happened to him. So these kind of responses from feminists I have heard, I have experienced, and after, like, many such instances, you also tend to believe in Arundhati Roy, where she says, like, our idea of the criminal who are doing this, she only talks about class there, but it includes caste, religion, all that. And which is also, like, it is represented in movies, which is represented in all kinds of popular media, where you come across the villain, the victim in certain colors and caste and certain religion. Are so much conditioned by somebody's location in caste and religion and class. How can we think of feminism as an independent, something that suspends, that hangs in vacuum? It's not. Feminism cannot stand in vacuum. Feminism definitely takes on the caste, color, religion, etc. of the person who preaches it. And that's why, like, sometimes I find it very silly. There are, of course, there are struggles. But, like, just because somebody is divorced, or just because somebody is living alone, or just because somebody is, I would say, somebody has experienced, the popular example we have, I was not given the fried fish. So was not, those could be discrimination, but actually when it comes to larger experiences of women who are, like, living under the threat of mass rapes, and who are living under the threat of, like, getting killed on a day-to-day basis, those kind of, like, sometimes I feel actually there is a little bit too much exaggeration, where this woman who also earns a lot of money and work and would say, I'm a single mother and I'm a feminist and I have brought up. Of course, she has her struggle, but there are a lot more, and that's not the immediate question before us. And for feminism right now, the immediate question is not about this, or for instance, like, sometimes when we listen to experiences, sometimes when we listen to people, we also find it very, very difficult to speak. There are moments, for instance, like, afternoon, I have one or two small videos for you to watch. Something like talking to women in Kashmir. Women in Kashmir is not just, again, one homogeneous kind of category, but talking about women who have experienced the struggle, like, the political turmoil there, this whole being victims of the insurgency, and being victims of state-sponsored kind of attack on civilians' life. Sometimes, like, these kind of issues that we talk about, the issues that mark our day-to-day experience as feminists, might get a bit insignificant when we listen to those kind of trauma. But I'm not nullifying anybody's experience. I'm also trying to say, actually, what you are, where you come from, also has a lot to do when we talk about feminist experience. And in many ways, like, for instance, I get attacked. I get attacked in public if I walk. And immediately, as of now, at least, even with CAA and all that, I can just go and complain in a police station. And I can do that even more strongly than any other Muslim woman, because my name won't, especially in the South, it doesn't sound so much like a Muslim. So I can walk into the police station till they ask my father's name. I can just pass as the so-called independent citizen who doesn't have, who's like secular. The moment I say my father's name, my secularism also, like, kind of falls. When I say this, I just like I can go. I can ask for justice. I can say this man or this. I can say this man attacked me. I can even say this employee, whoever attacked me. Even if a policeman attacks, I can go and say this policeman attacked me. What if I'm in Kashmir? I'm living there. Where will I go? Do I have a place? Is there a state that I can appeal to? And that is one thing. And think about Palestine and places like that. Further, like there is no nation. There is no space that I can call as mine. So this whole idea of displacement also works into my identity so much. I don't have an identity in me. And if I am a refugee, then what is my position? And how will I get an identity in that situation? Who will I go to? Who will I ask questions? Where will I demand for justice? So there is no demand for justice that I can make in those kind of fluid situations. These are like fluid situations, very volatile, but at the same time, these are like in-between spaces where Ansari has given us, MT Ansari has given us this term, interstices, like, the space where we don't have a space to, we don't have a place to go and appeal to. So these kind of identities, and when we talk about feminism as a larger framework, talking about rights, what can feminism do to work with such identities is one thing. And in many ways, like recent research has pointed out one thing, which is Sarah Faris's work on femonationalism. She also, like Bell Hooks said many years ago, these white feminists are exploiting black women. Sarah Faris also finds this femonationalism. She says in many ways nationalists, right-wing nationalists and feminists are working together when it comes to exploiting the refugee women, and also in creating a narrative that would ostracize the Muslim male in the refugee camp. So in some ways, the Muslim male there are ostracized as criminal and made into a kind of outcast. And the labor of these women, especially in the care sector, household chores and taking care of children, etc., the labor of refugee women are used. Something like how this whole feminist narrative came up during the Triple Talaq debate. Muslim women are suffering because of Triple Talaq, and therefore they need to be kind of saved from Triple Talaq / Muslim male / Islam, whatever, because it is an Islamic practice. Or then finally the court came out and said it's not Islamic. And that was kind of resolved in some weird way anyway. So what I am trying to say is, and on all these questions, what is important is the question of identity, and how is feminist narrative coming up, used, exploited, and also how the feminist narrative is creating a platform for certain kinds of collaborations. And many times these collaborations also work with right-wing nationalism. As during the Triple Talaq, feminists wanted to end Triple Talaq. Hindutva people also wanted to end Triple Talaq. So was there a silent kind of collaboration? So is there a way in which mainstream feminism could separate themselves from these kind of activities? And Dalit feminists have brought this up many times in the past. Especially now when it comes to sexual harassment, Dalit women say, we don't believe in this mainstream feminist codes. We don't want to associate with them. We would have our own discourse within the community, and we talk about this in a different way. And Dalit women's autobiographies address this whole question of domestic violence and Dalit identity, and they would say we don't want this to go beyond the level of the community, reach of the community, because This is something which has also a lot to do with the idea of caste. Gogu Shamala's short story, father, father is an elephant, mother is a small basket, though. That's the title of the story, written by this Telugu writer Gogu Shamala. Father is an elephant, mother is a small basket, though. That's the title. So there is this Dalit male who who had to leave his village because he was falsely accused of stealing something from the landlord. He didn't do it, he was falsely accused, but then he had to leave, otherwise he'll get killed. And when he is away, the woman of the house takes over, she works and she struggles hard, and one child is given away to marriage. Now she has come back to give birth, and then this man comes back after some time. And when he comes back, again he gets beaten up. And when he gets beaten up, he comes and asks his wife for some money for drinking, for alcohol. And she doesn't have the money because she is keeping that money to take care of the delivery of the daughter. And then he beats her up. The Dalit male who comes home, he beats her up and then he goes. And the story is eventually things are normalized. The girl gives birth to a child, etc., etc. And there are generations of women, his mother, his wife, then his child, etc. So actually Shamala is, if you look at this narrative, it's not just about a Dalit man beating his wife. It's also about how he is falsely accused of theft, how he is kind of depleted of every instance of honor that an individual can have in a society. He doesn't have a job, he doesn't have money, he is also beaten up by the upcast men, and he takes it out on women. Of course, there is patriarchy. But if you look at this as an instance of patriarchy, is it just patriarchy? So the unevenness is not just about beating his wife, it is also about, and the wife is not just a victim of this male, she is victim of this caste hierarchy in the society. There is caste which has an overarching kind of presence in the lives of these people. And so if we are just reformist feminists, we can just look at this as an instance of patriarchy. If we are more into a revolutionary mode of feminism, we can think about this as an implication of caste oppression in the society, and we can work towards eradicating caste or annihilating caste. So those are two ways of looking at this issue. Yeah, so